Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us to discuss the official plan review and the draft policy directions for transportation and environment. As a reminder to please make sure that you're on mute during the presentations, and we'll have an opportunity for questions as well. My name is Mojen Gianfra. I'm your facilitator for this evening. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we gather virtually on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and Huron people. We also acknowledge the many First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and other global Indigenous people who call Mississauga home. We welcome everyone. We also have Councillor Dasco from Ward 1 joining us today, and Councillor Parrish, I see, from Ward 5 as well. Thank you, councillors, for joining us this evening. I'd also like to do a quick introduction of the staff who are here today. We have Jason Bevan, Director of City Planning Strategies in the Planning and Building Department. We have Ben Phillips, Manager of the Official Plan Review, Sharleen Bayovo, Planner and Project Lead, Amina Menkad, Planner, Susan Tanabe, Manager of Transportation Planning, Alex Legrand, Project Lead for Changing Lanes, and as well, we're joined by our meeting producer, Jasmine Chandy. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Councillor Carlson's here, but his screen is not on because his machine. So he's listening to my machine at a 10-foot distance.
My apologies, I didn't see that. Well, welcome to Councillor Carlson as well from Ward 11. Thank you for all of you for joining tonight. Thanks, Councillor Parrish. So quickly for tonight's meeting includes two presentations followed by questions of clarification and open discussion of the draft policy directions. We'll have just under an hour for the meeting. However, staff will stay online afterwards for 30 minutes following the meeting to answer any other questions or hear any additional comments. Next slide, please. So if you are using your phone or if you are calling in and we'd like closed captioning, there is that option as well. Just mean if you could turn that on. So if you do require closed captioning, there is a button at the bottom of the screen that you could select, and you could have closed captioning throughout the meeting. And as well, we do encourage that you use the chat function so that we can get the most amount of people participating during the meeting. And if you do have a question, please add a couple of question marks beforehand so that can flag for staff that you are posing a question, and staff will be responding to your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to address them as we're going through. If you do also want to raise your hand, that's an option as well. And if you're calling in and you're not able to access the chat function, you could press *3 on your phone to raise your hand and *6 to unmute your phone when it comes time to ask your question. To give you a quick little orientation on how WebEx works, so we mentioned there's the closed caption option at the bottom left of the screen, and you can mute and unmute yourself in the middle of the screen, and there is the chat function to the right. And please remember to select everyone when writing your questions so that everyone can see the questions coming through, and you can raise your hand if you hover over your name. You can see the option to raise your hand. We do suggest if you would like to have a stack view, that's a bit of an easier way to see the presentations, and you can go to the top right corner and select stack view. And thank you again for joining us tonight. And we do ask that you contribute actively, respectfully, and equitably throughout the evening. Great, we'll kick it off with a quick poll question for everyone, just to get a sense of who's in the room and what you're most interested in. And so the first question is, did you attend one of our official plan review committee meetings last fall? Yes or no as the answer options. And the second question is, what are you most interested in tonight? Are you interested in the transportation component or the environment component this evening? I'll give you a few seconds to fill that out to let us know who's in the room and what you're interested in. Great, and we can see the polling options. Okay, so we do have some people who've attended previous meetings. That's great. Welcome back. We're glad to have you back. And for the people who are here for the first time, welcome. We hope you enjoyed this meeting and the conversation. And it looks like a lot of people are interested in the transportation portion, but a good amount of people are also interested in environment. So we're looking forward to the conversation this evening. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Sharleen, who will present on transportation policy directions.
Great. Thank you, Mojane. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to learn about official plan policy directions for two key themes, transportation and the environment. Following my presentation on the transportation policy segment, there will be a question and answer session, and then the environment segment will be presented by my colleague, Amina and Menkad. Next slide, please. I'll start the presentation with background information about the official plan review purpose and approach, and show you where we are in the official plan review timeline. And throughout the presentation, I may use OP instead of official plan. It's just a shorter version. So we're required to, under the Provincial Planning Act, to update the official plan every 10 years. And the original Mississauga official plan came into partial effect in November 2012. That's our current plan. So the review process we started in 2019 is working towards updating the OP by 2022. And I should clarify when saying original, that's not the original. There's many more plans before the 2012 version, but that's the current plan, the 2012 version. So when we update the OP, it must conform to and be consistent with new provincial and regional policies and legislation. The OP policies must also align with direction from over 30 city-initiated master plans, strategies, and action plans that have been completed over the recent years, such as the Transportation Master Plan and the Climate Change Action Plan. Next slide, please. As we review OP policy and start to amend and draft new policy, we have 4 guiding objectives that we're following to make the OP a more streamlined and strategic document. Conformity, we're looking to simplify policy, add certainty, and be innovative. So I just recently spoke about the conformity piece with provincial and regional policy and our city's plans. We will be looking to simplify OP policy language. We want to provide greater certainty in policy direction for all stakeholders, including council, staff, landowners, and the public. And we're looking to be innovative and consider policy best practices and new trends. Next slide, please. We started the OP review in 2019, and most recently in October of last year, received community feedback during virtual engagement sessions on draft policy priorities. We are still in phase 3 of the review, continuing community engagement and sharing key policy directions. And then our next step will be to start drafting policy amendments. Next slide, please. Last year in fall 2020, we gathered community input on the policy priorities under these 5 theme areas: city structure and urban design, housing, transportation, environment and climate change, and the community infrastructure and jobs. And of course, we're focusing on transportation right now. We reported back to Council on the results of the 2020 community engagement in March of this year. And today's review of the key policy directions has considered community feedback received to date. So the next part of this presentation is going to be now focusing solely on the transportation piece. Next slide, please. Direction for changes to OP transportation policy comes from the Provincial Growth Plan and Provincial Policy Statement, as well as the Regional Official Plan and Regional Transportation Plan. There is also direction from over 10 citywide transportation-related master plans, strategies, and studies. A key document is the Mississauga Transportation Master Plan. I may say TMP for that as well, another acronym to shorten it. The goals and objectives of the TMP are implemented through the city's cycling and pedestrian master plans, the Transit and Road Infrastructure Plan, the Transit Infrastructure Growth Plan, which is to help meet growing transit ridership, and the Parking Master Plan. The city is working with the region as well to delineate boundaries of major transit station areas and developing OP policy specific to these areas through the Major Transit Station Area Study. Next slide, please. This diagram shows the interaction of the Mississauga Transportation Master Plan with all the other plans and initiatives as they work to implement the goals and objectives of the TMP. And overall, this, I call it the big wheel of transportation direction, feeds into the OP review. Next slide, please. Community feedback also feeds into the review and influences OP policy priorities. These comment themes shown here are taken from the fall 2020 engagement sessions. I'll review a few of them with you. So some of the themes are: we need fair, safe, connected, and accessible networks for all modes of transportation. We're looking to prioritize pedestrians over cars, having bike infrastructure that is also good for commuting. Look to develop better service to key destinations in the city and to GO stations. Important that transit is reliable, frequent, and has practical connections. Ensure that public transit is carbon neutral and functional and fast. And then also address concerns about traffic congestion and road capacity as the city continues to grow. So we've considered all of these comments, and we're happy to see that the transportation policy priorities and directions that we propose do align with these comments. Next slide, please. So the next slides will review 6 key transportation policy directions. These policy directions come from the review of provincial, regional, and city transportation priorities and from the community feedback. These are high-level directions, but if you want more detail about specifics and how we're propose to change things, they can be found in the transportation memo that's on the Your Say page, and that link will be provided later. Next slide, please. So first priority, we want to restructure the transportation chapter of the OP and other policy areas in the OP to align with direction from the Mississauga Transportation Master Plan and ensure it's reflecting the 6 goals for transportation around safety, having safe roads and safe conditions for all travelers, inclusion, making sure we have an accessible network, integration, having an integrated network where it's easy to get around. Connectivity, having a simple and pleasant connections for everyone to get to where they want to go. Focusing on health, the health of people and the planet. So putting people-powered ways of getting around over cars, and so we can have lower vehicle emissions. And finally, focusing on resilience. So looking to adapt to changes in transportation as we move forward with our plan to 2051. Next slide, please. Our second transportation direction is related to reinforcing sustainable transportation modes that support healthy, active communities and reduce environmental impacts. We want to prioritize transit and active transportation, so things like cycling and walking and carpooling and transit. And we want to have less focus and reliance on the single occupant vehicle. Next slide, please. And this direction aligns with the Mississauga TMP target to shift away from personal auto use to have 50% of all trips by sustainable modes by 2041. And this little diagram just shows where we generally currently are at, with 71% being auto focused. So we want to change that. Less blue on the diagram. Next slide, please. There's a third policy direction. We want to support a sustainable transportation network that makes it easy and safe to move around the city. This includes policy support for connected pathway systems, first and last mile pedestrian and cycling connections to transit stations and stops, and infrastructure to support safe and accessible travel. We also plan to incorporate the Vision Zero principles in the OP in recognition that Mississauga became a Vision Zero city in 2018 and set a goal of 0 fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways. The safety of pedestrians, cyclists, and other vulnerable users are to be prioritized when designing and operating streets. Next slide. Our fourth direction is related to updating our transportation infrastructure design policies to reinforce infrastructure investment that supports transit and active transportation. The level of investment in transit and active transportation infrastructure represents a revolutionary transformation for our city in how we get around. And our OP policy language needs to reflect this, and it needs to be updated to reflect this. You can see there's significant investment being made in public transit infrastructure as shown in this diagram. For example, for the BRT lines, close to 360 million. Greening the bus fleet, and almost another 360 million. About 20 million relates to infrastructure for cycling and transit. So it's significant money being spent for public transit infrastructure. The pedestrian master plan notes that there is approximately 230 kilometers of new sidewalks identified as a high priority, and proposes a funding scenario that will allocate 3.1 million annually over 30 years to address the priority pedestrian network gaps. So another significant investment for the pedestrian network. Next slide, please. And this slide further emphasizes the commitment to transit infrastructure investment through the Hurontario Light Rapid Transit LRT. A contract of 4.6 billion was awarded by the province for the building of this 19-stop, 18-kilometer rail transit line running along Hurontario from Port Credit to the Brampton Gateway Terminal. Next slide, please. Our fifth policy direction relates to complete streets. The city is planning for complete streets that are safe, accessible, and that support sustainable transportation options. Through the city's project called Changing Lanes, a new street classification system is being developed to apply to streets across the city. The recommended street classification approach considers two aspects of a street: its link character and its place character. And you'll see the purple circles and the orange circles related to where those apply generally in the city. So a link is a high link street has character that moves more people and connects communities together. So for example, the Hurontario corridor, the Dundas corridor. And a street with a low link character moves fewer people and serves local areas, so more related to a local neighborhood. A place character is a street that runs through an area with lots of activity. These are destinations with shopping and walking, eating, working. So places like Streetsville or Port Credit as an example. And then again, in our neighborhoods would be an area where there's less place character. So using this approach, we can tailor our street designs to support a street segment's movement and place needs both today and into the future. Next slide, please. And it gets more fun. So using this link place approach, the complete streets classification was developed. So that's what this diagram is here. And on it, it includes 14 street classes organized by 4 link categories, being arterial, major, collector, minor collector, and local roads, and the corresponding place inputs that are actually based on our official plan city structure. So for around employment areas, neighborhood, and then strategic growth areas like our major and community nodes and the downtown. So in the new official plan, we plan to add complete streets policy to align with all of this and incorporate this proposed new street classification system, both through mapping and policy. Now, for more details around this, I've really covered very quick highlights on it. You can also be involved in the project called Changing Lanes, and that's also available in the Your Say area. Next slide, please. And the final policy direction that I'm highlighting is related to updating our major transit station area policy. These MTSAs are required by the province and the region of Peel to be priority areas for growth. And we're required to define the boundary for each MTSA and to assign minimum density targets, as well as policies that promote new housing and jobs around these station areas. MTSAs include areas around existing GO stations, bus rapid transit stations and terminals, the Ontario LRT, and of course the Dundas bus rapid transit corridor. So when you look at this map and you see where all the green is, those are actual delineated areas around these stops. So a significant change is required to the official plan to integrate new MTSA policies and to amend the city structure mapping to show the boundaries of the 54. There's 54 major transit station areas in Mississauga. Next slide, please. So that concludes the highlights of the key transportation policy directions, the 6 directions. For more detail, like I mentioned earlier on the draft directions, please see the summary transportation memo on this Your Say link. Thank you. Back to you, Mojan.
Great, thanks, Sharleen. So if anyone has any questions about what was presented on the draft policy directions or any comments, please put them in the chat box below. And if you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my phone, reading the questions for Sharleen. So Sharleen, there were a couple of questions just to get a sense of the engagement timeline and the process. I don't know if you can speak to just what's been done thus far on the OP with the engagement time, with how you've reached out to participants and residents on engaging in the OP.
Mm-hmm. The first engagement session was in October of 2020, where we had virtual consultation meetings. And then we provided an engagement summary report that was part of the March, sorry, I don't have the exact date, but I can get it for you. The March presentation to Planning and Development Committee that highlighted all of the community feedback. But we continue to receive comments through the Your Say page. There's different ways that you can interact with us and provide comments. So we're happy to receive comment at any time. And our next engagement timeline will receive comments from this meeting, and we'll start to work on draft policy and decide when it's best to come to the community and share that.
Great, thank you. There was also another question of clarification just on if the slide decks will be shared. So just to clarify, at the end of this meeting, we will be posting all the meeting materials on the project website, and staff are taking notes throughout the meeting. So we'll make sure to address all your questions and comments. If we're not able to get through them in the meeting, we'll be posting them on the project website as well. I'd like to open it up in case there's anyone who's calling in who's not able to type in a question in the chat, who might want to raise their hand, and we can open up for a question or two. I'm just looking to see if there's any raised hands. I don't know, Jasmine, if you see any that I'm missing. Oh, we do have one from Alok. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If you'd like to unmute yourself to ask your question, you can press *6 if you're on the phone.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. So I think I just put a comment on the chat box. So it's great presentation. I think obviously very well thought out, and continue to be engaged on how this evolves. My question was a bit more around thoughts on public transportation. And what are your thoughts on as we look at a lot of this remote work coming into play, and also as we get more congested, so to speak, what are your thoughts around that? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass that to Sharleen. I'm not sure if you want to pass it on to anyone.
Just I thank you, Mojan, and thank you, Yasser. I just want to be sure I'm understanding the question around public transportation and congestion. So I may not have been too clear on the exact question. Could you summarize it again?
Trying to make sure I get my unmute buttons here. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it was really more around, and maybe I can phrase it with an example. Like, I mean, we see a lot of Mississauga transit buses moving around, most of the time empty, so to speak. But we also know at the same time there's a huge demand for enabling public transit.
And staff will be replying to them as quickly as possible, or as they come in. But as a reminder, if we can't get to all the questions, they will be posted online on the project website. So we will be replying to your questions and your comments. And also at the end of this meeting, staff will be online for 30 more minutes so we can have further discussion as well. But for the next part of the agenda, I will pass it on to Amina, who's going to present on the environment draft policy direction. So take it over, Amina.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Amina Menkad, and I'm going to take you through this next part of today's presentation, speaking to how we intend to continue to protect our natural environment and respond to climate change. Next slide, please. So again, going back to the 5 policy themes that have been identified and confirmed through the fall engagement of 2020. Today, I will focus the conversation on the environment and climate change component of our review in a way that essentially answers the question of how will we support a healthy, active, and resilient city. Next slide, please. Through the fall 2020 engagement, we asked questions regarding the protection of our environment and a land use response to climate change, and we have received a great deal of feedback. Essentially, the questions really kind of gravitated around how we can continue to protect our environment and respond to climate change. What we've heard from you, and I'll be reading from left to right, is that you would like to see increased trees, parks, natural green spaces in the downtown core and elsewhere in the city. You'd like to see expanded, preserved, and connected green spaces, such as parks, trails, community gardens, a better support and showcase of the Credit River and its indigenous history. You'd like us to provide a continuous, protected, and publicly accessible waterfront. On the climate change front, you really highlighted the importance of climate change as a city priority, and you'd like to see it now part of the official plan vision. You indicated that future growth should be directed in a way that protects air, water, and land for future generations. And you also would like to work together to reduce our emissions, minimize waste, produce more energy, renewable energy, and promote local food and production, local food production. All of this feedback has actually made its way through our recommendations, and you'll see it as I go through it in a short little while. Next slide, please. So when we talk about protecting the environment, what we really talk about from a land use standpoint is our green system. The green system is the result of many refinements and has been really enhanced significantly through the adoption of the city's natural heritage and urban forest strategy in 2015. The Mississauga official plan approach to environment protection and enhancement is a system-based approach, meaning that unlike a feature-based approach, which really focuses on a feature and protects it in a fragmented manner, a system-based approach really looks at the entire system, including linkages between features. So in a sense that what we have right now is a system that is made of 4 components: the natural heritage system, natural hazard lands such as floodplains, parks and open spaces, but also the urban forest, which includes residential woodlands, street trees, trees on private properties, which gives us an opportunity to care for everything green within the city. The review of the official plan will continue to protect and enhance the green system by integrating additional green components, such as the privately owned, publicly accessible spaces, what we call POPs, but also other kind of public spaces that will be identified through future parks plans. Next slide, please. So I'll speak now to key recommendations and directions when it comes to protecting the environment and addressing climate change. Next slide. So the bulk of our environment policies really resides in Chapter 6 of the Mississauga Official Plan, where the chapter is called Value the Environment, and we intend to continue to value the environment. Chapter 6 will be further strengthened, and its policies as well, by implementing a few recommendations and directions. These recommendations are available for you to review in more detail on the Your Say page and the memos that are posted, but I've chosen for us to kind of go through today through this presentation. So the first first one is obviously to conform with requirements from provincial and regional plans in protecting water sources. Implementing updated policies to source water protection in accordance with provincial plans and policies, as well as regional directions, is a requirement for the official plan. We also need to adopt an integrated approach to land use stormwater infrastructure planning, which will ensure that natural areas are regarded as assets, providing valuable ecosystems. We intend also to include language that emphasizes the importance of watershed planning in conforming with the provincial regional directions. Watershed planning is going to be central to the new Mississauga official plan because planning authorities such as the City of Mississauga are now required to protect, improve, and restore the quality and the quantity of water by using watershed as an ecologically meaningful measurement for long-term planning. Finally, we intend to reinforce the importance of natural and hydrological features in areas as green assets in responding to climate change. Next slide, please. When it comes to answering or responding to climate change, protecting the environment is not going to be the only measure that we undertake in the official plan. There has to be a more comprehensive approach to climate change from a land use standpoint, at least. I've highlighted 3 important recommendations for you, but again, there are many more in the memos that are posted on the Your Say page. So number 1, the application of a climate lens to complete communities. The application of such lens is going to be important. It will allow us to emphasize the need for more compact built form, transit supportive densities, and where feasible, supporting alternative and renewable energy systems such as district energy. Number 2 is to support climate resilience and green development practices in building. We can achieve that by directing existing and new development to examine, where feasible, the cumulative environmental impact of stormwater, including assessment of how extreme weather events will exacerbate the impact, and the identification of appropriate adaptation methods, incorporate more low impact developments or LED and infrastructure, green infrastructure where possible, establish planning and design directions to minimize things like vegetation removal, grading and soil compactions, impervious surfaces, and also the creation of open spaces that may include opportunities for things like urban agriculture, rooftop gardens, communal gardens. So all of these together will constitute what we intend or what we see as the land use approach to answering or to responding to climate change. And we're not doing all of this in a vacuum, and that kind of speaks to one of the questions that were asked earlier. We're doing this to reflect actions and recommendations from plans that have been done by other city, other divisions within the city. You may be aware of the Climate Change Action Plan, which really spoke to a broader kind of response to climate change. Land use is one component of it. We also are working on implementing recommendations from the Mississauga Transportation Master Plan, the TMP, but we're also working in collaboration with Stormwater Management to work on the Stormwater Master Plan and the city's urban agriculture strategies, which are currently underway. Next slide, please. So to kind of speak to this comprehensive approach to land use approach to climate change and how we respond to it. We needed to make sure that everyone understands that we'll need more than one tool in the toolbox in order to respond to climate change. The Mississauga official plan is going to be the primary implementation document for land use, climate change mitigation, and adaptation measures, but it will not have all the measures implemented there because of its high level of policy. It will be the guiding document for many other documents that will come and follow. So for instance, other tools will include the zoning bylaw, where we delineate hazard lands, determine densities, protect and restore natural assets. We will have also a set of green design guidelines within our green development standards. Those will speak more to built form, sustainability, runoff control, urban design. We will also use site plan control to secure landscaping requirements for stormwater managements like easements. We will also rely on community improvement plans, taxes, incentives. These are the areas where we create collaborations and really have programs that support the policies and the plans. And finally, we will have bylaws such as the green roof bylaw, which will help us kind of capitalize on those roofs that we have across the city. So in a nutshell, while the Mississauga official plan will have the guiding principles for how a land use approach to climate change will be structured, it will also provide guidance for other documents to implement this response. That wraps up my short presentation, and I'll open it up for questions. Thank you, Mojan.